population of almost 130 million, a rich cultural history and diversity, and abundant natural resources, Mexico is among the 15 largest economies in the world and the second largest economy in Latin America. The country has strong macroeconomic institutions and it is open to trade. Over the last 3 decades, Mexico has underperformed in terms of growth, inclusion, and poverty reduction compared to similar countries. Its economic growth averaged just above 2% a year between 1980 and 2018, limiting progress in convergence relative to high-income economies. The currency of Mexico is the Mexican peso. Currency code MXN. The modern peso and dollar currencies have a similar common origin to the 15th-19th century. The Mexican peso is currently recognized as the third most popular currency in the America. Behind the US dollar and the Canadian dollar, it is also notably the 10th most traded currency in the world.
So we move to the theoretical literature. This study seeks to represent a different theory for how the real exchange rate of the Mexican peso in relation to the US. Our model is based on a traditional method of the competition theory created by Sheikh. This theory of competition, which has its root in Mark and Keynes' writing Milberg 1994, contests that a nation or industry absolute advantage in terms of product, technology, and labor productivity determines how competitive it is on the global stage. According to this concept, the real exchange rate center of gravity is determined by a country's competitive position as assessed by the real unit labor cost of its tradable sector.
The first factor affecting Mexico's exchange rate is inflation. Over the last few decades, Mexico's economic history has revealed that exchange rate movements have been strongly correlated with the country's inflation rate. The consumer price inflation rate reached its peak in 2000 and its lowest point in 2015 with 2.72%. When inflation is higher, this tends to have a depressing effect on the value of the Mexico's currency. Increased inflation reduces the currency's buying power, which weakens it against other currencies.
Factor affecting exchange rate of Mexico, which is foreign direct investment voted to the government by the firm investing and was provided by the Central Bank of Mexico. In 2012, FDI in Mexico has the highest value, while in 2013, FDI has the lowest value rather than others here. Foreign direct investment plays an important role in globalized economies, especially export-oriented ones like Mexico. Foreign direct investment is cash-haul category that refer to the longer-term cross-border business activities and joint ventures.
The next factor affecting exchange rate in Mexico is term of trade. Mexico is a trade-oriented economy with imports and exports totaling 78% share of the GDP in 2019. It is an important trade power as measured by the value of merchandise traded, and the country with the greatest number of free trade agreements. In 2020, Mexico was the world's 11th largest merchandise exporter and 13th largest merchandise importer, representing 2.4% and 2.2% of world trade respectively. From 1991 to 2005, Mexican trade increased 5-fold. Mexico is the biggest exporter and importer in Latin America.
The last factor is government expenditure. It refers to the purchase of goods and services, which include public consumption and public investment and transfer payment. For that indicator, we provide data for Mexico from year 2000 until 2022. The average value of government expenditure of Mexico during that period was 4.33 billion Mexican peso, with a minimum of 3.99 billion Mexican peso in year 2000 and a maximum of 5.26 billion Mexican peso in 2014.
Next is descriptive analysis. The analysis of this study will represent the annual data for 20 years starting from 2000 until 2020. Based on this table, we can see foreign direct investment has the highest number of meanwhile the lowest is government expenditure. The highest standard deviation is foreign direct investment and the lowest is inflation. And then the highest and lowest of the minimum and maximum.
Next is correlation. It shows the strength of a relationship between two variables and is expressed numerically by the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient's value range between -1.0 and 1.0. A perfect positive correlation means that the correlation coefficient is exactly 1. A perfect negative correlation means that two assets move in opposite direction, while a zero correlation implies no linear relationship at all. For inflation and government expenditure, they are negative relationship, which means when these two increase, the exchange rate of Mexico will decrease. Meanwhile, for foreign direct investment and trade in percent of GDP are positive relationship, which means when these two increase, the exchange rate will also increase.
Let's move to the multiple regression. The first one is model summary. The value of R squared is 0.93 means that approximately 93% of the exchange rate in Mexico is explained by the inflation, foreign direct investment, trade of GDP, and government expenditure. The adjusted R squared value of 0.91 indicates that 91% of the variation in exchange rate variability is explained. The independent variable explains the dependent variable. Next is coefficients. It demonstrates that foreign direct investment and trade of GDP have significant positive impacts on the exchange rate. As a result, the null hypothesis is successfully rejected. Inflation and government spending, on the other hand, are insignificant because they are the most influential factors influencing the exchange rate.
Analysis of variance or ANOVA is a statistical method that separates observed variance data into different components to use for additional tests. F-test is less than 0.05, which means that there is a significant difference between the average of inflation, government expenditure, foreign direct investment, and trade in percent of GDP. They are statistically significant variable in explaining the variable in the exchange rate of Mexico. The entire model is significant.
In conclusion, this study are now analyzed the factor affecting the rate of Mexico has affecting the inflation of consumer price, foreign direct investment, trade of GDP, and last is government expenditure. According to the multiply regression test from this, we found that it demonstrates that foreign direct investment and trade of GDP has significant positive impact on the exchange rate. We can conclude that the patch of exchange rate to the US dollar has been not appropriate regime for the Mexico. Actually, it was found that to have some negative impact to the Mexico economy.